Hi, everybody. Welcome to our November 16th Hosting for Sage 100 conference call. My name is Wayne Schulz, and I'm joined here today by Robert Eppele of Go to My ERP. And we're going to spend roughly 30 minutes or so going through some information on hosting for Sage 100. And I'd asked Robert to join me to just answer some of what I call frequently asked questions. I tried to keep the amount of slides down to a minimum so that we can more or less go through questions that some end users have asked or other consultants have asked me about hosting for Sage, and questions that I myself had and have been answered by people like Robert, who said, this is the way that it actually works. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your frequently asked questions today. If you have any questions that we don't go through that you'd like me to ask, please use the chat screen and type those in and send it to me. I haven't had great luck with going through and turning on audio for various people, so I would rather have you send through the chat so they won't have a lot of background noise and that type of stuff. Robert, are you on the line? Can you hear me okay?
I am, Wayne.
Okay, perfect. Just by way of introductions real quick, my name is Wayne Schulz, and I'm a consultant with Schulz Consulting. I work with Sage 100 accounting software. I started my life as a CPA back in 1986, and I pretty much have been working with Sage since then. My practice is limited strictly to 100 support, upgrades, configurations, troubleshooting. So we do work with both new and existing. We get a lot of customers that find us via the internet that come in and ask us for recommendations on various things, including hosting. So Robert, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. Robert Eppele here from Go to My ERP. I am responsible for the daily operations of our hosting operations. And I actually began my career with implementing Sage, NAS 90, back in the days of 3.4, 3.31, back in the day there. So I've been around the Sage space for quite some time, and we narrowly started getting into fully managed services back in mid-2005. And today we're now caught up to speed with technology and using it to its fullest advantage.
Okay, great. Let me just switch over here to your screen if you want to, if you want to share that. Give me just a second here. I'm just going to switch screens over, and then I'm going to have a couple of things. Okay, so we should see Robert's screen. Okay. A couple of things before we start, and I have a few questions to ask Robert today during the presentation, but some of the things that I found that are helpful to ask, actually 4 basic questions that I found when people are looking to move to the cloud that are useful to go through. The first is to ask yourself, why do I want to move? What's the reason that I'm moving to the cloud? The second is, what are my business goals in doing so? And these can be different for different people, right? Some of them it's cost. Some of them it is, I have a lot of remote offices. I want it to be easy for my remote workers to be able to log in from anywhere. Some of them may be security related. I want to take my accounting off of my main server and move it to a location where it's maybe a little more isolated so that not as many people in the company have access to it. A third question I suggest that we ask is, what portion of this do you want to manage yourself versus outsourcing? How full of a solution are you looking? Are you looking for somebody to host the entire thing and maintain everything for you, or is there going to be some portion of it that you're going to want to retain yourself? And then lastly, I have not yet met anyone who's asked me about hosting for Sage 100 where they don't automatically run a computation in their brain that says, what is my cost benefit? So before you even start to look at the world of hosting your solution, ask yourself, what's the benefit? What kind of a cost would make this worthwhile to me? Because then you can start to make a decision as to whether moving to the cloud is something that you should explore or not. So those are sort of the 4 things that I walk through with my customers and say, these are the things that you should really think about before you start asking some of the more technical questions. And so some of the more technical questions that I run into are these, and I'll chat a little bit with Robert to explain some of these, just to make sure that everything, comes through accurately here. The first one is, when people use the term cloud computing, and specifically I'm asking with respect to Sage 100, Robert, what does that really mean when they say cloud computing? Like, what piece of it do you supply there?
Sure. So I'm going to pull up some supporting slides during the conversation. But really what we're talking about is what is the difference in the architecture and construction of the product itself that we're clouding. And very simply, Sage 100 is a product that is best termed as a physically installed product where you're using infrastructure as a service to deploy it widely and manage it, versus SaaS model products that you would consider something like Salesforce or Avalara, products that actually are fully managed, maintained, and supported by the actual publisher. So,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask you a question. I hear people talk about two types of clouds, and I think this relates to the first part that you have up here, public versus private. What do they mean when they say that?
Sure. So public versus private. There's two terms as it relates to private, and there's generally one term as it relates to public. When we're talking about private cloud infrastructures, we're really talking about completely isolated physical systems that are for the benefit of the customer specifically. Now, that could either be an on-prem, quote-unquote, private cloud, or if you actually have the space that is 100% dedicated and available to you in an environment like Amazon or Rackspace, where the environment is 100% dedicated to you and you are not sharing any of the underlying infrastructure with other people. It's a little bit of a stretch with AWS or Azure, but I can get into that a little bit more. And then public clouds. Public clouds are generally termed in data centers that are widely available to communities where the underlying infrastructure, computing resources are then segregated using technology so that each individual can use various components and resources.
One of the questions that I've had from users when we start talking about this type of clouds, I've had some customers that have been like large medical practices, and they have questions about HIPAA compliance, right? Because they are very security conscious, and there's a lot of rules and regulations, and there may be other industries where you have security issues that previously might have kept people from wanting to move to the cloud. Are there any such instances, like specifically with HIPAA? I mean, is there anything that people have to look at, any kind of buzzword that says this is a solution that is highly secure?
Mm-hmm.
What do they
Sure.
ask in that kind of instance?
Sure. A lot of what, let's speak directly to HIPAA. A lot of what HIPAA compliance is related to is the securitization of patient information. And that could be as easy as the assistant at the front desk of your doctor's office having a screen in front of them that you may be able to see the patient information from before you. Well, that's not HIPAA compliant. You need to be able to kind of hide the screen or turn the screen away. When it comes to data and security, HIPAA compliance is more specific in that what they're looking for is that publicly, that there is no access to the data center, to the data itself, or any of the records specific to each of the patients. So the good news is, in most instances, as it relates to a very high quality, fully managed hosting service, they are already HIPAA compliant. Whether they get certified as HIPAA compliant organizations is a different story, but the good news is not many people are walking into data centers and just grabbing specific data off of people's computers. So it's kind of easy to hit the HIPAA compliance.
Okay, interesting. And one of the probably the top questions that I get when I start talking to people who have expressed an interest in cloud hosting is, what's the difference if I go and use cloud hosting for Sage 100 versus use an existing technology such as like a terminal server, a Citrix, like a remote desktop?
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be some pros and cons in there. I'm guessing that it's mostly that the latter things that I discussed take some time to set up.
Sure. Yeah. Well, basically, when we're discussing hosting versus any of those other technologies, basically which are services that enable you to use physical devices and optimize them, hosting in data centers like Azure or Amazon actually replace the underlying server provisioning like with RDP and terminal server. So basically what happens is this. If I'm looking to onboard a hosting environment internally, on-prem, so that I don't have to go to hosting, I will probably buy one large server nowadays. With that large server, I would use a product like Citrix or VMware to actually slice up that physical device so I have multiple instances of computing environment. And I can control each of those server instances for various applications. In the hosting realm, that's already built in. When we provision network environments for clients, we're literally providing 3 or 4 network servers that are provisioned already using the technology of Amazon or Azure. And we're integrating them and managing them exactly like you would on a physical device. So the technology really is conceptually similar, but the way that it's used is completely different.
So does that mean, by your explanation, that if somebody comes in and says, geez, I'm using a barcoding solution, and it's right now it's connected to, of course, to my on-prem hardware, can I move that to the cloud fairly easily? Like the scanners and that kind of stuff?
Sure. Easily is subjective. However, the answer is yes. In a lot of our experience and with what we've seen other providers do is by specifically working with the local infrastructure, making sure that certain access via ports, firewall, and internet performance are all in alignment, you literally can have handheld devices that are enabled to work with hosted products like Sage.
Now, thinking about Sage 100 specifically, are there any instances that you can think of where you've seen integrations that don't work? Like specifically, the most popular ones probably are, connected scanners, something that might be connected to shipping, like a scale, any type of EDI. Is there anything that comes to mind that says, okay, well, if you have this specific situation, that you might have to really work hard to get it to be in a hosted environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we have seen work well for most conversions from an on-prem to a hosted solution is that all of the physical devices, printers, scanners, what have you, are at a more recent version of release, either from a driver perspective or from its actual hardware perspective. We want to make sure that any of those things are at their newest level possible. And the simplest reason is that everything just transitions much smoother into new environments, like using Windows, for instance, Windows 2012 R2 or to be coming out 16 soon. So we want to make sure that all of those components are at the same level and they operate much better that way. As far as specific solutions, EDI, WMS, CRM, any of those other products, there aren't really any limitations on what can be hosted. The only times that we've ever seen any type of issues that may contradict that is when products are on much older versionings. Let's say, and I'll do this in Windows terms and then also Sage terms, anything usually older than a 2008 Windows Server environment, or when we're talking about products that were in the, let's call it the 3.7 range or less, those become a little bit more challenging.
So as long as you're relatively current with your version of Sage, with the hardware that's going to be connected, specifically, let's just use a simple term like a barcode scanner. As long as you're current with that, you have current drivers, and you're not trying to use something from 15 years ago, you're probably okay.
You're probably okay, correct.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Are there any best and worst candidates that you can think of for hosting? I know what I do is I tell people if you have a lot of remote offices and you don't have any IT resources, that almost becomes a slam dunk. But are there other things that I'm overlooking that you might pop to top of your mind?
Sure. So I guess we're really talking about who kind of are the best candidates for hosting. And what we have tried to do over the years is actually define that. And this little short list is kind of the characteristics that we're looking for in individuals or companies who are ready to be hosted. In a lot of instances, the best, worst, I'll start off with the worst. The worst candidates are the ones who just think this is a perfect solution for everything that they do. Maybe their expectations are just completely incompatible with what the reality of this type of model of business would be for them, or this type of support would be for them. So that's kind of on the worst case scenario where we're just already starting off with a bad attitude towards what the technology can do for an organization. And also too, when we don't have consensus with the entire organization that this is the direction we're heading in. That tends to be on the worst case. On the good side, we have people who are very comfortable with doing a little bit of remote access. Even if they're not, they understand how a web works, how a browser works. And as long as they're willing to be patient a little bit and understand, we can move them through the day-to-day usage of the system quite easily. But we did put together a little bit of a short list here about what makes an ideal candidate or not.
Typically, do you see like a number of users? Is there like a threshold for number of users? Because at some point, it's got to be very expensive if I just want to do one user, right? And I don't think there's probably many of those in the Sage 100 world.
Right. So as far as number of users, really, this is mostly driven by the function or the application of usage. We have organizations that are relatively small from a user perspective, several end users, but each one of those users happens to be at a different location. They're just widely distributed as far as their operations are concerned. So from a cost perspective, again, depending on the provider, you can actually get hosting down to a fairly inexpensive rate. But again, typically that's kind of a perspective that only the end user buying the solution would actually be able to tell us whether or not it worked for them.
Right. You have to ask, like I said initially, at the outset, you have to say, what's the value, right? Is there any value for me to move this to the cloud? It's got to be saving me some money, which leads me to a question that I always like to ask. Like throughout my career, I hate going to presentations where I don't at least get an idea of what's the cost, right? I need to know, is this something that I should like look further into, or is it so expensive that I'm just wasting your time and my time to look at it? So, and I always phrase it as a starts at price, meaning it's not fair to ask somebody to say, what's the exact price, and then come back later and say, oh, by the way, we need this, this, and this. So I usually try to ask people, what's my typical starts at price? And is there a typical starts at price that you deal with for, typically hosting Sage 100 in the cloud?
Sure. The starting app price, which is a mid-range point, so I'll restate that. The starting app price is a mid-range point of about $75 per user per month per application. So basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, hey, look, client, if you have Sage 100 plus some other product, Starship, CRM, warehouse management, whatever it is that sits outside of the database of 100, your expectation is that you should be paying a little bit more for the service and resources needed to manage. So yeah, that's a good question.
Okay, so roughly, I've got to be able to see at least $75 a user per month type of value for me to really consider it, right?
Correct. And then there's some differences there too that come with things like if you needed SQL licensing or not, and what other type of services that might need to be wrapped inside of it.
Okay, something like, do you need Microsoft Office on there, which I know is sometimes an added fee.
Correct.
A big question people have been asking me, and I want to be respectful of the time. We're coming up on about 5 minutes to go. I told everyone we'd be here for no longer than 30 minutes. Big question people have been asking is 100 versus 100C. Because I know Sage came out with this new version 100C, and a lot of people have jumped to the conclusion that 100C, the C stands for cloud. Any difference in how you host these two versions of Sage?
They're identical, actually. So the good news is there is truly no difference really in the way that we would manage it from the back end. So it's pretty easy.
Okay. So it's not any harder, any easier if people are on 100C. I think for the purposes of thinking about moving to the cloud with 100C, it's the same effort, you'd say.
Correct. Yes.
All right.
Exactly.
What type of uptime guarantee do you typically see? I mean, what are you offering to people for your service where people, because that's usually a question, it's usually one of the questions that people ask is, I'm not going to come into my office some morning and I'm going to be looking at my screen and it's going to be saying, can't connect to your server, which could happen just as well if you have an on-prem server, but it seems to be a little scarier if it's not in your office. So what kind of an uptime do you typically see?
Right.
Do you have a guarantee that you offer?
Yeah, so basically there's two pieces of the answer here. The first answer is that, yeah, we provide an uptime guarantee based on the product that we're hosting. So Sage 100, very specifically, is not architected as a high availability product. So what we do is every evening when we do our maintenance, we bring the servers offline for about 10 to 12 minutes so that we can perform our maintenance and management and stuff like that. So from that uptime perspective, in most worlds of IT, that would be not considered 5 nines. That would be something like 99.9. As far as the data centers are concerned, we have a wonderful technology on the back end called Amazon. And from that perspective, I wouldn't even know how to calculate this, but over the 15 data centers globally, over the last 8 or 9 years, the entire infrastructure of Amazon has been offline no more than 12 hours. So from an infrastructure perspective, phenomenal. From a management and care of Sage 100, just because of the way you have to bring it offline to do certain types of maintenance and routine items. But that's about it.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I mean, it's always a little scarier when you don't have the server in front of you, right? You can't just sort of give it a whack on the side and get that thing restarted to think it's off somewhere. So are you saying that your backbone, I'm probably using the wrong term, but where you're hosting most of your stuff is with Amazon?
Correct. Yeah, we chose that technology platform just about 8 or 9 years ago. Correct.
Okay, so it's pretty mature. Couple of questions that came in. Somebody had a question, and I think this somebody was asking on the assessment that you have on the screen, what's the number to the left of it? I think that's just a multiple choice. I think you went through beforehand and just selected from a multiple choice. Is that what it's there for?
Yeah, correct. So if anybody's interested, I can certainly share this with you. So it's an active questionnaire. Basically, what it does is it kind of generally categorizes the response based on our experience. And what ends up happening is you literally end up with a general assessment of what a person might be thinking based on these general assessment. And I have to say, having used it now for the last several years, it's pretty accurate.
Okay. Yeah, so that's just the multiple choice on it. And then John Kerr from over at Net at Work says he's seen a couple hosted rapid scale solutions with Sage 100 where the printing from the cloud hosted server to the locally installed printers is extremely slow and causing the clients to consider moving back to a physical.
And there's a great reason why.
Why is it?
So basically, when we're talking about printing, there's a couple of factors as it relates to printing, everyone. Remember, if my hosting facility is in Virginia, for instance, and your local office is in New York, gosh, that's a few hundred miles. So the signal is traveling a little bit. It's not a local response mechanism. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. And so that's number one. We've got a little bit of a latency matter as it relates to where the hosting service is to the actual facility. The second one to that is the fact that the upstream is actually lower than anticipated. So as a part of our service, what we've done in total is we provide upfront assessments to the network that is going to be using the environment. That way, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get out of the way those printing issues or just performance generally related issues out of the way upfront so we can make the recommendation to adjust either the bandwidth, some of the firewall settings, or just general health of the local infrastructure. John at NetworkX, I hope that was a good answer for you.
So it sounds like some performance tuning in some instances. I've heard those types of things too, and it's tough sometimes. It's without knowing a lot of specifics about exactly what's going on.
Right.
Anybody else have any other questions before we wrap? I want to keep it to 30 minutes, and we're right about at the timeline. So if you type them into your question, there's another one came in here. Hang on a second.
Sure.
John says, very, very good. I'll follow up with you via email if you don't mind.
No problem.
So he can email. Let me ask you a couple questions as we wrap up. First of all, thanks a lot. This was really helpful. I think there's a lot of kind of these specific questions that are very useful to get answers to that seem to come up an awful lot during conversations. Can people get a copy of these slides if they send you an email?
Absolutely, not a problem.
Okay, so do you want to switch? Let me just change presenter back to me, and I'll put up the contact information. So
sure.
Okay, get over here. Here's our contact information if anybody has any follow-up information. If you want a copy of Robert's slide deck, I'm sure you can send them out like in a PDF or a PowerPoint. Just drop him an email. His address is on here, or you can pick up the phone and call him if you have any issues. I'd be happy to help you out as well. You can contact me at email or give me a call directly. I'd be happy to help coordinate that. All right. Thanks, Robert. I appreciate it. Very helpful. And thanks, everybody, for coming. I think we kept pretty well on time. I appreciate it. And everyone have a great day.
Thank you so much, Wayne.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.